pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 18508 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. This episode will be a book review and recommendation. A new book has been added to the recommended reading list of this podcast. Title of it is Death in the Highlands, The Siege of Special Forces Camp Plei Me. This book was recently published by J. Keith Saliba. Keith Saliba is a journalism professor up there at Jacksonville University in Jacksonville, Florida. That's one of the things that attracted me to this story. Also the fact that I'm familiar with the country where Plei Me was located. The battle we're going to be talking about happened in October of 1965. Plei Me was one of those Special Forces camps that put out in the middle of nowhere. That put a Special Forces A-team out there, about 12 Americans, and usually a tribe or two of Montagnard fighters, out there all by themselves. They had a big battle in 1965, right about the time they had the big battle at Ia Drang, which was not too far away. The battle happened in October of 65. In October of 67, 2 years later, I arrived there at Camp Anari, the base camp for the 4th Infantry Division just south of Pleiku. I was a wide-eyed newbie there, didn't know anything. I was a Florida Flatlander, never spent much time in the mountains before, and here Uncle Sam sent me up to the Highlands of South Vietnam. When I got there, I noticed something. It was cold up there in those mountains. I was thinking, wait a minute. All I've ever heard about Vietnam was that it was hot and sweaty and muggy and just a bad place to be because it was so hot there all the time. When I got to Camp Anari in October of 67, first thing I did was look for a field jacket. It was cold up there. I'm familiar with that area. Matter of fact, they sent me out on numerous recon patrols in the vicinity of Plei Me. I didn't know any difference. They just said, here, you go out there and check this area out. About 12 or 15 times I went out on patrols in that area. Each one of those patrols would cause me to go and spend 3 or 4 days out in the woods and sleep on the ground, not knowing that we were right in the middle of some of the worst NVA country there was. Fortunately, my little recon patrols never encountered any large NVA forces. The only thing we ever ran into was the occasional drunken VC soldier who just liked to have a little fun shooting at the Americans. I know that country. I was also attracted to this story because about 3 years later, in 1968, I spent a few weeks up at another Special Forces camp at Doc Siang. Got to know those Special Forces guys quite well, and I believe their name, Special Forces, fits them real good because all these guys were special in one way or the other. Some of them might have been rear ends, but they were special in what they were doing there. They tell me that the day after I left Doc Siang, that Special Forces camp was wiped out by the NVA. All the Montagnards headed for the hills, and they said the entire A-team was wiped out. But that was all secondhand information. Don't know about it. Now you know why this story grabbed my attention. It's almost home, Jacksonville, Florida. When I was up at Gainesville at the University of Florida, I frequently would read the Florida Times-Union newspaper, where this story appeared. That's another reason for sharing it with you. Title of the story is J.U. Professor's Book Recreates Bloody Siege of an Army Special Forces Camp in 1965 Vietnam. The story was submitted by Matt Sorgel for the Florida Times-Union. He describes Keith Saliba's book. Again, that book is on the recommended reading list for this podcast. All you've got to do is go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, go to episode 1858, and there you will see a picture of the cover and a link where you can click on it and be reading it in no time. I highly recommend it. I have not read the book yet because I just found out about it, but my order is going in to get one. I highly recommend you get a copy of it too, because that was one H of a battle there. It was typical of many there, very similar to the Battle of Long Tan, where 2,000 NVA took on 115 Aussies and got their butts kicked by those Aussies. Same thing happened at Plei Me, but it was tough. If you want to see how tough it is, while you're over there at the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, when you go to episode 1858, you will see a picture right up there at the top of some of these Special Forces guys who were in that battle. You can tell from the looks on their faces, it was tough. It's very important that we learn as much as we can about what the Americans did in Vietnam, especially people like these brave Special Forces guys who defended the camp at Plei Me. 1965 was way back in the early days of that war. We really didn't know what we were getting into, but we were finding out quick with things like Plei Me and the battle at the Ia Drang Valley. Without any further ado, let's take a look at this story. I think you're going to find it very interesting. Dateline, Jacksonville, Florida. The real-life setting for J. Keith Saliba's book is an isolated, heavily fortified frontier outpost in Vietnam's west central highlands near the Cambodian border and the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the main conduit for troops and supplies from North Vietnam. To give you a general idea where Plei Me was located, it sat just a few miles southwest of Pleiku, a little bit south of Highway 19, and a little bit west of Highway 14, and only a hop, skip, and a jump from the Cambodian border where the main line Ho Chi Minh Trail was running. Vietnam veteran John Shoemaker, who has been a frequent contributor to this podcast, can tell you all about the Ho Chi Minh Trail because he was actually on it. He participated in a firefight one time directly on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It's very interesting. You now know where Plei Me is located. Let's move on with the story. Saliba said this: "It was a 20th century version of the Wild West frontier fortress in territory Army Special Forces soldiers called Indian Country. It was remote and dangerous." In October 1965, the camp at Plei Me was guarded by a 12-man American Special Forces A-team, along with Montagnard fighters native to the region and a small contingent of South Vietnamese Special Forces soldiers. By October the 19th, almost 2,000 North Vietnamese soldiers had crept into position along Plei Me. An equal number were deployed to ambush any relief force sent to the camp's rescue. At that time, the NVA didn't realize that our forces did not move by vehicles. They were flown in by helicopter. Continuing. And so begins the battle he describes in Death in the Highlands, the Siege of Special Forces Camp Plei Me, released this month by Stackpole Books. Check out Amazon. That's the best place to buy it. Vastly outnumbered, the Special Forces soldiers fought back with their Vietnamese allies in an ultimately successful week-long battle that involved vast amounts of close air support and daring air resupply missions. Saliba, a former journalist, is an associate professor of journalism and mass communication at Jacksonville University. One of the men he interviewed for the book was Yule White, 86, who retired from the Army as a major and lives in Florence, Alabama. That's up in North Alabama. All my people came from South Alabama, so I don't know much about the Florence area. Continuing. In October of 1965, White was a 31-year-old first lieutenant in Project Delta, a clandestine Special Forces reconnaissance unit. He was among those who joined in the rescue attempt at Plei Me, during which he was wounded in a ferocious firefight, an experience Saliba describes in harrowing detail. He praised Saliba's book. It was really educational for me because I didn't know about the background, the build-up to Plei Me, White said. He did all that research. That's another reason I'm recommending you read this book. Get a copy of this book and read it as soon as possible. Continuing. White said he knew the risk he was taking headed to Plei Me. I knew it was going to be bad out there, and when I got wounded and left alone for a time, my chances of getting out of there looked pretty slim to me, White said. So what motivated him? It was a Special Forces team under siege, White said. We always tried to look after our own. From the time I enlisted in the Army in 1951, it was part of being a soldier. Saliba said he found that same sentiment in his research. The response I got from both the guys on the ground and the guys in the air was, they would do it for us, they needed us, and so we're going to be there for them. This was our job. That's what we're going to do whatever we can to help them. Saliba has written about Vietnam for over 20 years, and even though at 53 he is far too young to have fought in it or even to be that aware of it while it was going on. He said the tragedy and heroism of the war is what drew him to it and kept him interested in exploring it. My generation, those kids who have grown up in the 80s, were maybe the first ones to see that the Vietnam vets were not well treated, he said. It was almost like a dirty secret. It always rubbed me the wrong way. It all started for him when he was a young journalist in Albany, Georgia. He interviewed a veteran of the battle at Ia Drang Valley, which was told in the 2002 movie We Were Soldiers, starring none other than Mel Gibson himself. It took place just weeks after the Siege of Plei Me, which is considered the prelude to that clash. While the veteran, unhappy with how Vietnam vets had been portrayed, was initially reluctant to speak, he eventually told his story to the reporter, and he and Saliba became friends. Hopefully, I fulfilled my pledge to be respectful and at the same time tell the story, Saliba said. Ia Drang was the subject of a book by war correspondent Joe Galloway, on which the Mel Gibson movie was based. Saliba interviewed Galloway about Plei Me, and Galloway gave him a nice cover blurb for his book, saying, "This story has it all. Keith Saliba has done them all proud." Note, another reason you should buy this book immediately. Continuing. In graduate school, Saliba's master's thesis was on Esquire magazine's coverage of Vietnam from writers such as Michael Hare, Dispatches, and John Sack. He has since contributed to a series of books on the war and has researched the psychological effects of the 1969 Tet Offensive. Saliba said he's thinking of next tackling a book about the rise and fall of ISIS in the Middle East, but he's not likely done with Vietnam yet. There were so many different layers, so much nuance. It was just fascinating, and obviously the longer you pay attention to something, the more comfortable you feel about writing about it, he said. Vietnam always keeps calling me back. You know, Keith, I know exactly how you feel. This is a message to everybody who has listened to this podcast episode. There were numerous reasons in there why you should immediately go to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, episode 1858, and as you scroll down, you will see the looks on those Special Forces guys' faces telling you it was a tough time. Scroll on down and you'll see a line that says recommended reading. You'll see the cover of the book, and then right below the cover of the book, you'll see something that says Buy Now. If you click on the Buy Now button, you will immediately be taken to that book in the Amazon book section, and you can buy it immediately and read it. I'll guarantee you it'll be worth the time and effort to do that. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1858 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?